Oh,
8,
yeah,
5,
I'm
and
just-
1.
Yeah, it might be.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm gonna call to order our Cottonwood Heights Community Development and Renewal Agency Work Session meeting for today, Tuesday, July 2nd, 2024. My name is Mike Wiggers. I'm the mayor of Cottonwood Heights. As mayor of Cottonwood Heights, I serve as the chair for the Community Development and Renewal Agency, with members of the city council serving as members of the board. So the first item on our agenda today is a hillside update and funding discussion. So I'm gonna have Mike Johnson tee up how we're gonna go about this. We're grateful to have many super important people here with us, and we're excited to hear from them. So Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Very quickly, we've invited MGBA, who's the project consultant in charge of developing the master plan in collaboration with the city and the advisory committee. So we'll hear from Greg Budrero with MGBA first for about 15 minutes to give you an update on the current site master plans that have been generated based on continuous meetings with the advisory committee. And we'll have Randy Whitehead come up and share again 15 or so minutes from the committee's perspective. We have numerous committee members in attendance tonight as well. And then we want to spend kind of the second half of the meeting talking bond procedures and kind of next steps that we need to do either procedurally or from a PR standpoint to get the word out on the bond that we got kind of informal consensus on that we're working towards now. So we've got Mark Anderson, right, with Zions Bank Public Finance to talk the procedural steps, and then we've got Wilkinson Ferrari, so Lindsay and Hillary with Wilkinson Ferrari to talk their experience and recommendations for public education campaign.
And I'll just add to your last point, Scott has done a lot of work on the forecasting for our projections that we're gonna add some important financial information as well.
Yeah, and you'll see when you see the site plans, the success of the bond is fairly important for the vision that the committee and the project team have developed.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. So we're gonna start with Greg. Greg, come on up. Greg, how do you pronounce your last name?
Budrero,
Okay, Budrero.
but it's been many pronunciations.
Hidalgo, yeah, I can.
My kids have learned quickly to roll an I the way that they hear it, and they're 10 and 12, so
Yeah, they already know.
they're learning pretty early. Where did my Zoom go? So we've had a series of really productive meetings with the advisory committee and working through a number of different options. We had started with an approach that took a number of concepts based on feedback from the committee and kind of desires that they had for the space. And so we've been able to work through those. We've landed on 2 options for that site. Currently, just for information, there's about 130,000 square feet of retail space in the existing buildings. And both of the options that we're looking at have about the same amount between each other, but is about 280,000 square feet of square footage. As we've gone through the exercise, we've not focused on uses. We've understood what types of uses would be successful, but we haven't tried to identify primary uses in any particular area except for on one corner where we're looking at where a potential grocer could go. And so there's
maximized, is that, or is that this big?
that's about as much as I can do on this one. I don't know if there's a way that who's hosting can hide the
Does the 280,000 include the residential square
It's-
footage?
ground floor and upper floor square footage, not identified as residential or commercial.
Thank you.
And so that's something that could be determined upon further development. And so as you look at kind of the overall area with this first concept, one of the drivers that we wanted to push with it was, and with both, is really how does it connect to the corner and how do you build off of that? How do you create this central street that could become very pedestrian and event friendly? And really look at how this central open space that's a part of the development can really become a key component to the space and allow that kind of public benefit to really permeate throughout the town center. And so within the center of the space, reaching down to the corner is where we would navigate a lot of the grade change that will occur. with a flat space on the upper end near that street, which would be a narrow street for two-way traffic, parallel on-street parking, and then a generous pedestrian sidewalk between the edge of the street and the facades of each of the buildings, and looking for opportunities for smaller gathering spaces, smaller pedestrian promenades or walkways, and just different ways to activate and engage with 2300 East with kind of a stepping building approach, as well as on Fort Union, how we might, in this option, have a larger parking garage for ease of access into the center there, and then a smaller parking garage on the southwest corner. This was one area that we felt a residential component would be very logical, because it is connected to that smaller garage and you could have reserved stalls for that. Otherwise, everything is really looking at how you might connect to those two parking structures or use that surface parking to access the shops and the restaurants and other businesses that are in the space. The second option has a lot of similar characteristics. The primary difference between this one is that it has a central parking garage along the back of the property, and the front facade of that garage is screened with the uses. And so instead of having the two garages on either end, with this one, we bring more of a meandering road to the center, and then the open space has a more direct line of sight from the corner up into the center of the town center, which gives you a lot of really great visibility from the corner down, as well as views from this upper kind of terrace out towards the west. A lot of similar characteristics with how we break up the buildings along 2300 East. This one has something a little bit more unique about it, with how these three buildings are divided up to create that central square that you saw on the other option, with the opportunity to maybe cover that and create something that's more friendly for the winter, or like a winter market. As we start to get into some of these subsequent slides, you can see some of the differences between the two with how they define the space. With a lot of these, as we've been working through options, our goal has been to find a way to balance the views both from the site and across the site, with a height of 35 feet as the maximum, and not really talking about number of floors, allowing that to be something that might be flexible depending on the uses that are found for this space.
35 feet, by the way, which is allowable in every zone that we have in the city. No,
Would some of these buildings exceed that?
no. So, yeah.
And would you anticipate some street parking on 2300 and Fort Union just because of the proximity of the buildings?
Yeah, and that's something that we've studied at a high level with this, to show how angled parking might work with one travel lane in each direction and a median. In the center of Fort Union, there is space for that. Depending on if you wanted to encroach onto the site more with that, you'd have the ability to accommodate on-street parking angled again on the other side of the street. For now, we didn't want to focus on that as the primary focus of the study, but just understand how angled parking could be provided to maximize that frontage on both of the streets. And so both of these show it the same. There is a subtle difference in the amount of parallel parking that you have between the two. And then this option, you gain some additional angled or 90-degree parking near where the potential grocer could
And this
go.
is public parking as well?
Yes.
Right there? And is that multiple levels?
Yes, the goal would be to have 2 levels, and then if there needed to be more, you could go down further. And with the current studies, the approach was to have like a meadow grass field or some form of green roof similar to that on the upper level. And so with each of these, like with this option, because of the amount of grade change across the site, a lot of the back of that garage would get tucked into the hillside here. With both options, we're looking at how much we can push the core area of the site down from the existing grades. Our preliminary studies make it work very well with accessibility at about 5 to 6 or 7 feet lower than existing grade on that upper end. That would require some export of material from the site, because we wouldn't be able to balance it all on the site, but we can take advantage of that as something to help with accessibility across the site and work with the topography. So a number of these views just really help show how we're taking advantage of kind of this context of the neighborhood on 2300 with more smaller buildings that step with the grade, with both of those options, each one of them kind of taking on their own character with how the space reaches out to the corner. And then looking at how different parts of the site could be closed off for an event while still providing access to the parking structures. And so there's different ways that you could do that for a farmer's market or a winter market or other summer events, and take advantage of the closed street, the rolled curbs or zero curb condition across that, and then the connection to the open space where you could have an amphitheater and a stage, and really start to get a feel for how, with the way that we're trying to focus on the views to the mountains and maintain that connection from the central square to Mount Olympus or to Twin Peaks, and always trying to keep in mind how Cottonwood Heights has a special connection to the mountains, and how can we reinforce that with both of these options. The key element that we've looked at is monumentation, how that might frame views and become a landmark at the corner, and then how we might use a clock tower or other similar element as wayfinding within the space, or as something that's really memorable and different for the town center that can become an icon for the space and really be something that people can connect to and relate to. And as you move through the views, you can see where kind of the position of the clock tower, depending on the option, changes, but is still there as a bearing point and a place that you can refer to meet up with friends or family. With both of these options, with the grade change that happens from that upper terrace of the square down to the intersection, we've looked at how there might be an opportunity for a stream feature or a cascade to really pull the idea of Big and Little Cottonwood Creeks and kind of those natural features of the community into the space. And here you can get another idea of how some of the streetscape and kind of overall composition of the spaces can be, even with kind of those height restrictions. And right now, those colors are really just representing ground floor and upper floor, and no uses or anything, just more of an easy point of reference to be able to understand kind of where things are going with regards to that.
What would be the use case for the landscape area on top of the parking garage? Would that be used? Is it just?
I think there's opportunity for it to be used. We wanted to keep it simple just to keep the costs down. And so if there was a desire for that to be programmed, I think with either of these options, there would be a way to get people up to that level. And maybe there are some passive trails or some simple structures. I think the challenge with that would really be fall protection and creating other barriers just because of where it is positioned. But I do feel that there is a way that you could use that space. With the current approach, we were looking at something that was a little bit more simplified as a green roof as opposed to a program space, but there's always opportunity for that on structures.
Why not parking if it's hidden by buildings?
I think that that's something that we could look at when it comes to parking counts, depending on where the uses land. I think that's something that should be open for discussion of understanding, like, is there more value in having that as a green roof, or is it better to continue to take floors down below grade and add more parking in that manner?
Significantly cost more.
Well, that's what I'm asking, why we would use like that roof for parking above, so you don't have to go down. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's an option, is a priority with the way that we were looking at kind of how the aesthetics might drive some of the decisions. The kind of more aesthetic choice was to look at how that might be a green roof as opposed to parking. And so
And
that's,
that green roof would be visible, would it be visible from those neighborhoods behind?
yeah, because the goal would be to try to set that level to be about equal with where those neighborhoods are, so that as they view the site and look across it, that's not something that's up in their faces and kind of an obstruction.
And you would not be able to go on those green rooftops. There's just.
There would be ways to provide access to it. We hadn't studied that with this, but we're at such a high level right now that if that was a priority, we could look at how that could become part of the open space.
Okay.
Some of the earlier concepts we'd looked at prioritize that as part of the major component of the open space, because we were looking at it with Walgreens kind of where they currently sit as opposed to reaching down to the corner.
Just with the parking decks already, there already would be an elevator and a stair.
Yeah.
And those things, so all it is add that extra. So it's, everything's built inherently for it, so it's really easy to have that access if it's wanted and needed.
Understood.
And it would be a great kind of passive space for views and trails and some, just a simple experience that's different from what's down below, or could be enhanced and upgraded to be something that's more programmed. So there's opportunity to kind of do either or both, if the funds are available for
A
that.
lot of space to leave underutilized.
Sure. One of the things that works really well with these views is you can see how it vehicular access from 2300 to the back of the garage. You could close the street off here. From Fort Union, you could come around to where that potential grocer is and behind. And so all of that space could be kind of a car-free public space during an event. And so like you really are able to take advantage of the benefit to the community with both of these options, each one of them having a different approach with the divided parking structures that are closer to the street. You can cut off a little bit more depending on how you circulate that, but both of them give you ample opportunity for the use of the street and the open space for events and community benefits. So
How many acres are being used for that public space in the middle?
public space in the middle, depending on how you count it, is between 1.5 acres and 2 acres, depending on where you go. The larger central space that's a little bit more flat on both of them is about 1 acre. If you start to get into like the little nooks and crannies of the more urban, intimate spaces, you can start to really dive into how much public space there is.
Thinking for events, like.
Yeah.
Acre to, so it's 1 to 2 acres.
Yeah, for that overall space. And then there will be with both of them an amount of terracing to deal with the grade change between the center of probably about 20 to 25, 26, 27 feet, depending on which option it was chosen and how it was developed between here and the corner. With a lot of that being taken up in this first third to quarter, and then allowing there to be some flatter areas that could be used for a concert or a potential ice rink or some other uses, depending on what the city's priorities were. And so there are some opportunities there with both options to take advantage of that upper area that is more flat, and as well as that sloped area that really relates to the foothills and to the canyons and really connects the space to the context of the community. Any other
I'm
questions?
gonna reserve my comments until after I hear Randy Whitehead's presentation.
Other questions for Greg?
It's so cool to see these concepts.
You can see the importance of corner that currently isn't there, right?
Walgreens have recently announced they're closing 1,200 stores. Can we be one of them? Can we lobby to be one of them?
But even
I
then,
mean,
you'd still have the landowner
Yeah.
anyway, just.
Well, I really, I really appreciate all the tremendous amount of work that the envisioning committee has gone to in this project. But my concern upon first seeing this is that if walkability is our key element, then people are gonna be approaching more from here and from over here and from up here. And cars will be driving through this intersection. So to have all this beautiful approach and be welcome, if people have parked their cars, they'll be coming in this way. So I'm not sure who is gonna really walk. There might be a few that come from, but again, I'm gonna be very interested in Randy Whitehead's expression of how this fits with the idea of encouraging walking and rolling into the site from, let's say, at least half the population that lives south and to the east and northeast.
Yeah. And one of the priorities of having the open space on the corner was for kind of the future growth and redevelopment of the other corners of the block. And that becomes kind of the true center of the intersection and serves as a great way for walkability and kind of interconnected use between those spaces. we've wanted to start to look at where crosswalks could be located and how bike lanes could be provided with the angled parking and try to understand how those different modes of arrival and could be accommodated. Of course, with further study, we can really get to something that works really well.
But if they redevelop the library and some of that other area, as more people are visiting those other aspects of the city, it allows that ability to walk through that corner. But I guess to your point, on its own, it definitely doesn't give that same feel, but planning for the future, right? Hopefully.
Do both concepts still have about 40 angled parking spots on Fort Union and 23rd?
Yeah, the angled parking is the same between the two. The parallel parking on the internal street is a little bit different between the two. And then concept B also has the additional 90-degree parking adjacent the grocer. With concept A, the grocer was attached to the parking structure. And so that was just two different ways that we approached how you might get people to park and shop at a potential grocer. Okay, go ahead, CJ.
I just wanted to add to your comment about the pedestrians. If 2300 and Fort Union can be minimized, then cars are gonna go slower, which means pedestrians have a better feel for being able to be more comfortable crossing the street and coming into the project, wherever they're coming from, because now they feel like, okay, this is my comfort zone now, and the drivers also will be a little more timid, a little more, on their edge, because they don't have that two-lane flexibility and they can 45 miles or whatever they're traveling. Just another point to add.
Any thoughts from the council on the concept A, the 2 parking garages on each end, or the one in the center on concept B?
I just really like the idea of the residents, or residential, they have their own parking spaces. I think that just alleviates a whole lot of problems.
Yeah, so concept B would be where would the housing be in concept B?
I think there are still ways that you could attach the housing to that parking structure on the back if that was on that upper floor. There was a natural tendency to look at how the housing related well to the neighborhood in this corner. But because of the desirability of having a reserved parking spot that's close to your house, like people would be drawn more to something that had an easier spot. But with the overall development change and a lot of people wanting to live in a place where they don't need a car, like that's certainly something that is also a change as well. And so on concept A worked really well to have that housing corner with its own structure and still have some public parking in it. And so with concept B, it would really be the question of where do you prefer the housing goes and is it connected to parking there or not? In concept B, there was surface parking behind it, just not parking structure parking behind it. And so there is still the opportunity for residential private parking next to concept B's housing location, if that's where it were to be located.
I have one more question. Let me know if we're not here yet, if we're not to this step where you can give this answer, that's totally fine. With the layout of these buildings, do you have a use in mind with the size and where they are? I'm just trying to get an idea of what you're envisioning as far as actual tenants.
Right. We've tried to make the depths of each building flexible to accommodate multiple uses, whether that's retail or businesses or residential. A lot of these smaller buildings that get kind of along the edge and broken up would be a spot where we could say, okay, maybe this is a destination restaurant that has rooftop dining and it's there on the corner. You've got that energy there. And so trying to get it sized to where it could accommodate that well. And then letting kind of the development partner that comes in the future to start to say, this is what we would like to put here that fits within the spaces allowed. And if there's some adjustments that could be made, there's room to do that.
Okay.
So we've tried to just leave it flexible without getting too hung up on identifying this is a restaurant, this is a shop, but allow those to really fit within different corners of the space.
I really like the way you've broken up the buildings so that there's a lot of circulation, activation. A lot of, so whatever you want to say, open, activation.
Connectivity and like
Right.
outdoor dining or.
Instead of long columns. So
Sure.
that's really wonderful, design and circulation.
Yeah, I agree completely with Councilmember Burrell. It makes it not feel like a mass of buildings.
Right.
And it creates a sense of openness to me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I don't know if I have a strong opinion, but I do like how concept B kind of does. Kind of really shapes that middle a
Yeah.
little more.
Probably drawn to the symmetry of it as well. And then if I'm a business owner, I'm just trying to think what would entice me to take one of those corner businesses when there's not, and the parking's so far away.
Where are you talking about?
Well,
Just
closer
down
to the.
towards the
Are you talking about
To-
this taking that?
Further down.
No, down here.
Closer to the.
Right.
Oh, down
You park here.
So one of the things they're gonna have is this parallel parking on the street, 40s. So you've got 40 on one street, 40 on another, about 80 spots. Yeah, 80 spots to me is a lot. On the street before you even get in.
You have a pretty stroll to the rest.
And it is,
February.
So another thing, that road,
The boots and
I'm
coats
not
are
going
for
there in
it.
February.
the road, do we know how many parallel parking stalls you have kind of on the roads?
I wanna say that in those, we ended up with. They didn't give me an annual parking count. I can double check that though. I would say that we're probably 50 or 60,
So before even a parking garage, you're looking at 40, 80.
like 100 or so surface.
20 to 130
Okay.
parking spots. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
There's, yes, there's a apartment village, you can picture it on Union, South Union Park and 900 East. Where Creek Road kind of comes up to Hillside, not Hillside, Hillcrest High School. They've got ground floor leasing available, nobody's taken it because there's no parking.
Yeah.
So I mean, as much as we want to try to increase walkability and bikeability, we are not quite there yet
Got it.
as a community to completely abandon our cars.
Yeah, well, awesome. Thanks, Gert.
yep, thank you.
Don't go too far.
I won't.
Okay, Randy.
I'm gonna leave this up, Randy, or do you have the share?
And your results.
All right. First of all, I really would like to express appreciation for all those that have been involved in this project. And there are an awful lot. The 12 members of the committee have spent many, many evenings talking and discussing and looking and planning and listening to the residents. The residents meeting, we had those two formal ones where I thought the residents came out in force to share their ideas. And so what we've tried to do is incorporate the residents' ideas into what they want. And you've seen now the big picture, the high level of what the property could look like. And there are some really great ideas that came out of it. What I'd like to do is I'd like to take us from that high level and move us back to the vision of what Cottonwood Heights can become and what this town center can mean for the residents. And throw in a few specifics and details and potential ideas. Because if we're going to share this with the residents have to be able to see what's in it for them, what benefit they get out of it. If it's merely another development, well, the city doesn't need to be involved in another development. But if it's something specific that will help the residents, now we're really talking. That's what the meat and potatoes are, I believe. The devil's in the details. I'd like to thank the city council for giving us the opportunity to even talk about this, and the mayor's vision and drive to help it happen is incredible. and MGBVSA and your entire team. I think you've brought together the essence of what we're trying to do. Now, with that background, let me just start again. And I always like to go back to what the residents want, because essentially that's why we're doing this, is for the residents. And again, here's what they said. They want some great restaurants. They'd like some destination restaurants. They'd like local restaurants. A lot of them wanted a grocery store. Everybody wanted a gathering place, a place where we could connect with each other instead of, well, we don't have a place really to connect. And this would give us a place to connect. It would give us an identity for what the city is. They wanted some open spaces, some gardens, a place for performance, not a big formal center, but some informal performance areas. They wanted it to be for the people. They wanted parking to be underground rather than just be a parking lot. They didn't want high density. They wanted some affordable housing. They wanted shops. They wanted bars. They wanted a senior center. They wanted to preserve the views. And I think, as Greg described, the whole design of it was to exploit and enhance the views so that everyone could see and enjoy them. Food trucks, events, holidays, farmers markets. So here are some details that are important. There has to be something for traffic mitigation. So as people come to it, walk or ride or what have you, it needs to be safe. Pedestrian safety was mentioned over and over again. Make it walkable to be able to get there. Have some welcome walking entrances. We have the one on the corner of 23rd and Fort Union, which is awesome. But we also need to incorporate some beautiful ways to, if you're walking from the neighborhoods, that it likewise is inviting and wants you to go in. We talked about having a roundabout at some point in time down at that intersection. The residents mentioned connecting all the parks and the trails in the city. And might I add, schools? So if this development became the template for what a walkable trail or neighborhood byway may be, then this can be the beginning point from which we can connect all of the rest of the city through a similar appearing streetscape. Beautiful gardens. There was discussion about what do you put on top of that parking structure if it's just green. Well, there are a couple of things that you could do. That's a beautiful place for enjoying the views. So the residents would love to have benches and gazebos and so forth where they could walk and sit and rest and just look out over the city and look at the other mountain views, because you can get mountain views from here all the way over to Kennecott Copper Mine. That's the kind of views that are available at that level. There's also a water conservancy district that has offered to fund and give grants to build water conservancy gardens and show what is available for landscaping to be water wise, which would fit beautifully up on top of that garden. Rooftop seating. Wherever there are restaurants, everyone said they wanted sidewalk dining, or shall we call it green space views also. Or the second levels could be rooftop dining. A key concept was to have an event coordinator and have regularly scheduled events throughout the year. And this would lend itself to it perfectly. The details, again, make all the difference. Again, design and emphasize and frame the view of the majestic mountains we have between the canyons. Now, take these concepts that we just saw and superimpose in your mind on this concept some of these details and get the vision of what Cottonwood Heights can look like and what this town center could mean to the residents. Beautiful streetscapes, again, with sidewalk dining.
May I just ask on that? I'm a little bit confused because I thought that both A and B concepts did not have activation along Fort Union. Like they didn't have, they had just a sidewalk, so I
It's
didn't
that
think.
center road that goes down in the middle.
So this is inside, this is not along Fort
It
Union
could.
or 2300
There's-
East.
It could easily
Site plans
be
didn't
there
have that
also.
detail, but it will
I
accommodate
still
that.
expect Fort Union to have that. Councilmember
Is there
Brown.
space for that? Because I didn't think there was width for that.
Yeah.
There's width for something like that?
Yeah. We tried to leave generous sidewalks there as well, so that there could be activation for patio dining or.
Yeah, I think that's real important to a main street. No one-
You have to slow the traffic to mitigate the noise to make that enjoyable.
Yes.
That's what that roundabout to one lane would do. Yep.
Well, there'll be 45-degree angle parking, so it
Yeah,
won't look
that's
like
true.
that, right?
Again, great restaurants. Everybody wanted great restaurants in the square and also on the streets. The residents wanted a gathering place, a large place for to have events on a regular basis. Again, this one shows what rooftop dining could be overlooking a square or a plaza. Farmers markets on Saturdays. A Christmas market. And see, it's all these events that create the connection for the city and the residents. It gives us a place, our own, of Cottonwood Heights, of where to go and connect and say, I love this city. I love being here. And this can be the catalyst. This can be step number one towards making that all become a reality. Host events. Arts and crafts fairs. Movies. In the square. A senior center where seniors can gather. A neighborhood boutique grocer. Local artisan shops. Picnic areas. Imagine the picnic areas up on top of the parking plaza overlooking the town center. Fire pits and seating areas in the wintertime to keep warm. So even though it's cold, it's a place to go and hang out and enjoy. Fun things to do.
He missed that one.
I wanna see that.
That ball was long gone.
You couldn't see the ball, I hit it so hard. Oh, no, you do see it, okay.
Yeah.
I went by.
I hadn't hit it yet, just wait, I was getting ready.
Oh, you're on a show.
I want to talk for a moment about walkable. My wife and I love to walk. But in our city, we don't have sidewalks that are conducive to walking. In many places, we don't even have sidewalks, so it makes it hard to walk. But envision, if you will, streets that connect all of the parks, that connect all of the schools, that get us from one side of the valley to the other, that enable us to walk where there's landscaping and it's safe to walk and to ride. That would do more towards helping us become a more healthy city than anything else. We just need to build it because everybody stated that's what they want. And again, this town center enables us to envision and see what it would be like and to spread out in all directions from there. It may take us 20 years, it may take us 25 years to get there, but at least there's a vision, there's a starting place, there's a way to get there. You can have landscape walking paths, an outdoor performance area. One of the things that we found that was really amazing is that the younger generation wants places to take selfies. They want the Kodak moments, but they call them selfies. And so the more art, the more things that we can do, the more views that we can create, the more beauty that's available is what creates those. And it creates connections. And again, a sense of love for this incredible community. So what I wanted to do is just bring this down and talk about the details, because that's really going to be the next step. And it's the details, how we ultimately design this, that will sell this to the residents. And I see some incredible opportunities. I see the opportunity to take this beautiful city that we have and take it to the next level. And that's what I envision. And I thank all of you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts and even to be a participant in this cool project. Thank you. And if there are any questions, happy to field.
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Randy. No, that was awesome.
I'd like to just praise you for something I've coined, which is we have a suburban mountain lifestyle in our city. And I think what that captures is the mountain part is our desire for recreation and to be able to get out and go. And our suburban part is that, we're not a highly dense city. So I really appreciate that you focused on maintaining those mountain views as part of our identity for the city. Well done.
Thank you.
Suburban mountain lifestyle. Keep focusing on that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Randy. That was super beneficial. And thanks to the committee who's done so much. We really appreciate them. So we're gonna transition now into numbers. To finances. So I'm actually gonna turn some time over to Scott to kind of frame how we want to go here. We've got 25 minutes.
Okay, so. You want me to go? That one?
Yes, that's perfect.
While he's doing that, I just want to note the master plans you saw in this vision were derived kind of after that last council discussion where we talked about financial, public assistance tools that could help implement the public benefit that was explained and demonstrated tonight. So that's why this bond discussion is so critical, because that element is really important to being able to implement a vision like you saw.
Yeah, 100%. The two concepts we saw are dependent upon this.
So a couple things is, so currently we have a little bit more than $13 million of debt associated with purchasing the property up there. There would be additional funds if we were to purchase the Walgreens site. And of course, there's going to be funds needed to be able to demolish what's there and then to begin the public space build outs. We wouldn't build the buildings and things, but the public space build outs would need to have funding. And then, of course, the parking garages, that would have to be determined who would be responsible for building those, whether that would come with the building developers or whether that would come from the city in some kind of a partnership and so on and so forth. So there are funds needed in order to be able to complete this project. So starting just with a starting point of 25 million as a potential of what the funds that might need to be needed for this investment. And we don't really know what the rate could be. It varies a little bit depending on if we go tax exempt funding, which needs to be for public purposes, or if we go taxable funding, which would be something that where we could potentially do a land lease or other things along those lines in order to be able to have buildings and other things put on that. Or potentially sell those spaces eventually to, a developer or what have you. So using 25 million as kind of a placeholder for what we would potentially need and financing it over a 20-year period and then putting a range of percentages with 4 probably being about where it would be, 4%. Our payment would be a little under $1.9 million, somewhere between 1.8, $1.9 million, somewhere in that range. If you go to our property tax data, and this is for 2023, I did this before we had the property tax stuff for the current year that we're in, but it should be pretty close. So the property tax rate for 2023 was 0.001422. The average assessed value home was $717,400. The taxable value of that home would be just under 400,000 at 394,570. So the average home annual tax right now that's paid is about $561 annually. Okay, total checks generated in the city is about $8.8 million roughly. So utilizing that and backing into the tax needed that we would need here, the percentage of our current tax base of this 8.8 is noted here. So it's around 19.5 to 21.3% of our current property tax base that we would need to, you know, to accumulate in order to pay a general obligation bond if we went down that way. So if you then back that back down into the additional home tax that would be needed, it's between about $110 annually to $120 annually. So that's somewhere between $9 and $10 a month if you're looking at it on a monthly basis, so on and so forth. And then that's the tax rate required in order to get that. Again, this is based on 2023 data, so it would change slightly going to 2024, but the dollars should remain pretty close. The rate would change a little bit. So we currently, like I said, we have the debt on the Hillside Plaza bond. We have currently paid $560,000 in an interest payment that was paid in January of this year. Just yesterday, we paid another $580,000 that's a partial interest and partial principal payment. And then in January, on January 1st of 2025, we'll pay another $375,000 in interest. All those payments together add up to $1,516,000. It's possible, but we would have to look at the bond indentures and what have you, and how that's all going to go up, and our bond parameters, sorry, and everything, that we could potentially repay ourselves from bond funds for these expenses that we've already incurred, because we're not going to be able to get a bond in place, supposing that this passes before January 1. It's just not possible to do that. So if you make the assumption of that, it's possible, and I underscore possible, that we could reimburse ourselves for $1.5 million of expenditures that we would already incur. If it may not be possible to do all that, but it may be, we're still very early in that phase of talking, and we need to talk to the lawyers and what have you to say, how do we do this and how do we structure it? So that's, you know, some of the parameters that you need to be aware of and everything. A GO bond does have requirements from a calendaring perspective that we need to do between now and the date of the vote, which would be along with the vote in November, when we would do that, the general vote, and things that we can go into some of those kinds of things. But before we go down that road, is there any questions about some of the numbers in this document?
How likely is that we're gonna be able to pay ourselves back? That just the procedural, or just don't know yet?
Mark, do you have any input on that?
My initial inclination is that if the city were to adopt a reimbursement resolution after a successful bond passage, or the payment was made in January, or within 60 days of that payment being made afterwards, that would be the most highly likely portion of that you'd be able to be reimbursed.
So that's the 375,000. So we'd have to get more clarification on whether or not the 560 here and the 580 here could be potentially repaid or not, because those will be, like Mark said, more than 60 days prior to when this would occur.
That goes back to our general fund.
That's where the funds of this ultimately came from, is we transferred money into the CDRA fund from the general fund to make these debt service payments.
What kind of criteria we're looking at for older payments, Mark? Is that something that we'd have to meet?
Is it okay if I set up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you'd probably have to build something into the election language that would allow for the city to be reimbursed for those payments as part of the GO bond question.
We definitely have to work that through legal to make sure it's legally acceptable to do that, but then make it very clear to the public as they're voting that that would be an intention of the bond.
Just trying to make it really clean then by you paying the city back, and then so everything else is just CDRA. It's the development. Like, why would we pay ourselves back?
It's
Just more cash.
It's an option. Yeah,
It's
an option.
so this is taking the entire project.
I haven't put any of that into any of my financial projections in terms of the general fund. It's just one of the things that could potentially occur. So that part of potentially repaying us back is just a possibility. It's not something that we're counting on at this point in time. Mhm. Any other questions?
So in the event that the GO bond does not pass, then we will continue with the kind of discussions that we've had over the last year for, well, will we, is that something we want to talk about anytime soon?
Yes.
And,
Yes, and I think we would frame the discussion as we would move to a more housing centric project.
Or be the reality.
The reality would be, we
Yeah,
would need
you gotta
to
make the
involve
economics.
development community that would need to put more housing, less retail, more height. We could still get our public area, but the project would change.
Mhm.
And I think that will be an important part of the framing,
Yeah.
put to the public.
Well,
That they understand that.
one of the big things is general obligation bonds is the absolute most inexpensive way you can finance whatever it is that you're doing for a city. It's the absolute most inexpensive, if you get the absolute best rates for that. Any other option that you do costs more money to do, because it doesn't matter how you go out to bonding, it'll cost you more unless it's on a general obligation bond, because under a general obligation bond, you're given the green light that you can increase taxes to cover a debt service payment. And the public voted for it, so it's something that, it's pretty much ironclad. And so the bond ratings give that very, very good ratings.
right. So we're already in the first week in July, and I know that it'll be perhaps the next topic of discussion here in just a moment to talk about timing and everything. But since the ballots, if this is going to be on the general ballot, people will get that in their mailbox in early-ish October. So we really only have less than 2 months to create something that messages to the public, all of this, because many people vote as soon as their ballot comes into their mailbox. So we don't really have until the second week in November. We'll really have until early October to share this vision and the outcomes should the bond not pass.
And we have some general timeframes. They haven't been tailored specific, but we have some general timeframes where, basically by our second meeting in August, the council would need to pass a resolution calling for an election on a GO bond. So that would happen if you're counting tonight's meeting as one meeting, and 4 meetings, we'd have to be prepared to do that. And so, moving forward, there's, that's where it really starts. There's work to do before that, but that has to happen. You miss that, you can't do it, so.
So I want to involve Lindsay too in what
Yes,
we're talking
yeah.
about, but before we get to that, let's look at the projections
Yeah.
of what, if we do this, how that's going to affect our projections.
Okay, so this is, I know it's small, there's so much on here, but I wanted to make sure that we could see what we can see and everything. But if you look, this is our actual from the prior year, this is our budget for the current year we're in. And then this is our projection of where we think we're gonna land the current year in terms of our revenues. These little small numbers down under here are how we compared to our 5-year projection that we did in February when we did that. So going now, we've adopted a budget for the year that we actually just started yesterday. And we have a projection. We've already updated the projection a little bit because we did not include any revenue from UDOT for the additional police officers doing traffic. And so we know that's coming. So we added $200,000 in there for that. So the difference between this ending balance here and this ending balance here is just that 200,000 for that. Going out into the future years, just to outline some things, basically I took the budget that we have this year and then moving forward, used a modest sales tax increase of about $300,000 to $400,000 each year. And that translates into a 3 to 4% increase in sales taxes in those years. And then the other thing that we did is we reduced our contribution to our roads from $3 million to $2 million with the possible intent that in a future period, I don't know, yearish out or something like that, we would implement a traffic transportation fee that would replace some of that there. And then the other thing is that we remove our debt service funding that we need to do for the current $13 million bond for Hillside, where we're transferring that money from the general fund to the CDRA fund in order to make that payment. Those are the main things that we did. Let me just look and see if I missed something else.
So what this specific forecast does,
Yeah, so if you go down here, what you need to do is if you look at the budgeted ending fund balance, which is this column right here where this first gray area starts, you can for sure make it here to 26, 27 and get there in terms of your ending fund balance, because you got to make it with your budgeted fund balance, not your projected fund balance, because you don't count under expend when your budget. But then the next year you would be at a slightly negative thing. Now, one thing I want to also mention, I'm kind of pessimistic in my forecasts. I'm going to project revenues a little bit more stingy, and I'm going to project expenses a little bit more robust. So in almost every case, it's going to be better off than what my projection is going to show here. But one of the things that we did as we were looking at this is said, okay, well, what if we had the ground leases ready to go and we were receiving revenue from the ground leases from the building areas? Well, we anticipate that starting in 26, 27, we could get about $1.75 million. So if you look at our budgeted ending fund balance, it stays at $3.5 million there, $3.1 million there, and drops down to about $2 million in 28, 29, where you're barely under what you need to have in order to meet what you need at that point in time for budgeting. So you're really getting out far. And for me as a finance guy, you get out 4 or 5 years in your budget forecast, it's pie in the sky, and you're going to miss that no matter what, because there's so many variables that go into things at that point in time that I can't give you any degree of confidence in what we're doing that far out. So you really got to look at your 2-3 year kind of thing. That's really the nuts and bolts, and the overall trajectory of where things are going. That's really what you want to look at. Kind of ignore your 4 and 5 years.
so bottom line to what Scott is saying, if we are able to convince the residents to vote for the GEO bond, our initial outlook from Scott's forecast, there is not in the next 3-4 years, we're not showing that we're gonna have to increase property taxes. So we would be increasing them with the GEO bond, but our regular property tax mill rate would not need to be adjusted through his current forecast.
Well, and I'm sure a question that's gonna be on the mind of residents is if they go with this bond, will there be a need either annually or maybe every other year to do an additional bond in order to realize the kind of, monies it's gonna take to pull off such a massive project? I mean, because
Yeah, so the general obligation bond would limit you because it would be in the decree for the bond. You would be limited if you went with this at 25 million. You couldn't go to 26, 27, 28.
no, I'm not saying in that calendar, I'm not saying in that ballot.
Mhm.
I'm talking about in a future.
We feel like the 25 million we wouldn't need anything above and beyond that.
That would be enough to get some of the infrastructure going until we had investors. And I mean.
Yes. So what our purpose would be fulfilled with the 25 million. We could do
The only
what we
other
wanted
need you
to do.
need an additional one is if for some reason a council down the line made the decision that they wanted to look at the 3 remaining corners and do a future project. But for
And there
this,
still could be
for
funds.
this specific project, that would not be the case. And another thing though, that I think is important to mention, Mayor, is it does push us off from having to do a property tax increase, but you know, one of the biggest tasks that we have at hand, which is why we look at things like the gravel pit and other things, is creating additional diversified revenue base so that we're not just relying on the backs of residents and taxing them. Because frankly, there are communities that do that, and it's a tough thing because they're just constant. And there might be years, and we've had them here in Cottonwood Heights, which is why we have not had to raise the property tax rate unlike other cities around us. We've had a decent sales tax base, and other TRT has increased as well, not as much as we would like, but it has increased. Those things help the residents make life more affordable here in our city.
And that's the message. It's clarified.
So there's another option that we learned talking with Mark and Zions Bank this past week. One of the things that we could do is the revenue that we earned from the land leasing, we could actually cover the geo bond payment.
Or parts of it.
Or part
At
of
some
it. We
point in
could
the
cover
future.
20%, 50%, all of it. Yeah, if our revenues get to a point where we could cover that geo bond payment, and so that the residents wouldn't have to have that included in their property tax.
So what would the length of that? How long would that?
The bond
property tax
payment is
include?
20 years.
20 years, so if for some reason we can take it down to 15 or less, but at most it'd be 20.
But it would actually be, hey, we're in 2029, we're gonna cover the payment. Our revenues look good enough. We could cover the geo bond payment for that year, and it wouldn't show up on the property tax bill.
Basically, each year you're authorized to increase tax or to set a tax rate that would cover your debt service payments. But if you chose to say pay $1 million out of the general fund, out of the land lease, revenues to cover that, then you could take whatever that rate is, less than $1 million, and set your tax rate at that level. The council has pure discretion to do that, but they're authorized to go up to the maximum level they need to cover the debt service payments associated with the authorized bond limit.
How many years do you think that'll take before we're paying the bond back with revenues?
Well, it depends what you do with the revenues, because you're not forced to take the revenues to go back. You can utilize the revenues to help with development costs or for other things. And so it depends what you do with the revenues.
We can use the revenues in our general fund to put off an eventual property tax increase, or we could pay this one and we'd have a property tax increase sooner than later.
How are you gonna simplify this to sell it to residents?
It's a great
Simplify
segue
this.
that we probably should invite Lindsay
Yeah,
and Hillary up to
we
talk
can
about.
Yeah.
Because it is critical.
Yes.
Because my mind is.
Well,
Yeah, there's a lot.
we have an expert, so we're gonna invite Lindsay and tell us how to do it.
Mark, did you have
Eric, can I
anything
just
else?
make
Yeah, no
a couple
pressure.
comments, if
Yes.
you don't mind?
Yes.
Zions is happy to put together a tailored calendar of events that follows the timeline for the bond election. In that, the first step is we need to have a resolution adopted by the legislative body calling for a bond election by say the 21st of August. And in order to do that, we have to do a few things. We have to be able to identify the maximum, the amount that is proposed to be borrowed. And I think we need to dig deeper and determine what what would be paid for with that, and we'd have to identify what would be a tax exempt eligible financing versus a taxable financing for those things that would be more related to those properties that you would potentially enter into long-term leases for. They're more private sector type benefit versus public, public assets. And then Zions can look at the estimated interest rates that we would receive on those kinds of bonds and project the tax impact that would need to be included in that resolution. And then we just need a good description of what it is the city's proposing that would be on the ballot as to what are citizens voting for. So we have a clear vision of what the ask is of the citizens. And then we can work with the rest. And I think just it's important that you start yesterday to help the citizens understand the vision and what it is that the city's trying to accomplish and why it's important. And then, help them understand what it's, the economic impact to them as individually.
Do we have any restraints legally on promoting and starting our promotions before this August 20 vote?
There's
Well,
no legal
well,
reason.
I think we know these guys are.
You do have some, but I'll let them talk.
You can even stay there if you need to, Mark. I'm fine. One of the things that we really didn't mention is that, Greg and the consultants group, they are in the process of doing renderings with, more specific detail on both concepts. So anyway, Linda, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us. I mean, this is a challenge. This is we've done a lot of these. This is a short runway to get there, but there are some advantages, and the advantage is that you've had this amazing committee working on this, in various parts of the city. We've had 500 people fill out a survey. We've had hundreds of people come to the public meeting. So there's a little bit of a head start in communicating, but there's a lot of work to be done pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, to answer your question, we look at this in two phases. There's the before, what was the date the city council will vote?
August 20.
There's the before August 20th, and then there's the after August 20th. Before August 20th, we can, the city can support this, can come out and talk very candidly about why this is good for the city for a variety of reasons. After that August 20th, we have to get much more just here's the facts. So we have to take advantage of that time between now and August 20th. So that we're calling that the pre-bond decision goals, and that is to we need to re-engage the community around this project. Right now, if you go to the website, it's about a town center, about what get involved this line of a town center. We need to shift to the ideas that Randy was talking about, the experience. We need to start positioning this in terms of what is the experience people are going to get from this place, and what does that mean for the city now? What does it mean for the city in the future? What does it mean for property values in the future? I think we can start talking about it much more broadly. We'll also need to get feedback on if we're going forward with two concepts. This is a great opportunity to keep engaging the public. They have a choice here, and they can help be part of that decision making.
That's a good question. When you say the two concepts, are you saying the A and B?
Yeah.
Not the
Not
with and without a bond?
correct.
But I do think we'll have to give that some thought, but I think it's worth showing the public, you're either supporting something that has this public use or you're not going to get as much of that public use. There's a trade-off there.
I don't know if we have time to
We
get into the weeds on concept A and B. I think we have to go to the punch of, here's a concept
Pick one.
of what it can be, or you can have like the
More
rate
of a-
development example of 340. I don't think we have time to.
The
move
committee's
on to
takeaway is
concept A and B.
they're similar enough and they have the same public
Yeah,
benefits and just
yeah.
different layouts that we can kind of interchange and use both.
They're
of
very
them together.
similar.
My gut tells me that it's more beneficial to say, this is what we could have with public investment, or this is what we would need to do. It's really a binary choice. I mean, that's the reality of it.
I agree. And then we also can start to educate residents about that's like what you just said, that why public financing would be helpful. And then this also gives us an opportunity to communicate to cities, why have we been doing this for a year? There's a reason the city has been engaged in this process, and we need to talk candidly about that. So after the August 20th date, then we start demonstrating the purpose and benefits of the town center. Still focusing on experience, communicating how the GO bond funds will be used. And there's some complexity there, obviously, from this conversation. That's our job. Our job is to take these complex concepts about, how the tax might work over time and simplify that. So we'll have to give that some thought, but I'm confident it can be done. We've done it on other projects. And then educating on that financial impact, helping people understand that $9 to $10 a month. And
How do you sell that without getting too into the weeds?
which part?
The financial impact. I mean, how do you, Councilmember Highland brought that up. How do you just simply say, hey, look, this is gonna cost $9 to
That's,
$10 a
you
month?
have to.
That's still, okay.
You just gotta be transparent.
Yeah.
And the gain has gotta be good enough for the $9 a month.
Yeah.
That's just the bottom line.
And that number doesn't scare me. I mean, we've done enough of these. That feels like a pretty good number.
Okay.
You know, it would be helpful to me. I understand you were successful, that you were part of getting the Galavan Center, the geo bond for the Galavan Center. Is that correct?
No, we weren't. Uh-uh.
What-
no, we
what-
were-
what
we
is
were
your
on-
Experience with geo bonds.
Oh, we've worked with Summit County, with Salt Lake City. We just did one successfully for Midvale City last year. Last year? Yeah. Yeah.
So it would be helpful for me for you to share, here are the 4 different brochures I put together, or here is what I did with Midvale. You know, we did this on June 1st, and then this came out on July, and physically show us. I realize our project is not identical to Midvale, but I think that showing what was successful could help to light our imagination for, you know, how that could translate to Cottonwood Heights.
Yeah.
Because again, whoever said it, this probably should have started a month or 2 ago. So I mean, to me, it's very nerve-wracking, because marketing and getting in the minds of the public and helping them to have the tools they need to digest it. Because I don't think it's gonna happen overnight. I mean, we're talking about the electorate of Cottonwood Heights. That's a lot of people.
Mhm.
You know,
Well, I
very
think-
small percentage follow any of this stuff.
Yeah.
The vast majority are gonna get a ballot in the second week in October
Mhm.
and then go, oh, I don't want, you know, I mean, we have a lot of work to do in the next few weeks.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I think one thing we want to take advantage of is the community advisory committee. I mean, we've talked about doing, you know, neighborhood meetings in each one of their areas and having them be part of this grassroots effort to start building support in their neighborhoods. We're gonna have to do things like that. We're gonna have to take advantage of events. We've got to be able to use social media and the website, get that website updated. And then we go to later in sort of August, early September, you go to maybe a mailer to every home. And we have showed some examples. Can you go back one of the Lehigh Parks bond? That was a mailer that went out. That was the city, Salt Lake City's streets bond. Is that website?
Yeah, so the Lehigh City graphic, it's an infographic. It was in 2016 when infographics were really hot, very popular. We shared it out over social media over a number of weeks, and then had a full scale infographic that kind of took them through the trail or the park of the parks bond. The other one is a flyer for some community conversations that we had at local coffee shops. So we took every one of the city council districts and met with those residents in that district at a coffee shop in their area, or a snow cone stand, because it was summertime, and answered those questions and got the word out about the streets bond in particular.
You wanna make them feel, the reality of it as much as humanly possible, to where the point that they almost feel like it has happened and they don't know how they could live without it.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing that's been really important in several, and that is our focus groups, where we find out what would put them over the top. You know, we test messaging on them, and we find out what is the thing that is going to push you into the yes category. And it's different things. Sometimes it's just a message. For Park City residents, it was learning that on a sales tax initiative, that visitors were going to be paying 60% of the sales tax. On another project, I think that was Midvale, the city decided to throw in a trails improvement project as part of the park spot. And that's what got people over it. It's like, okay, even if we're not going to use the rec center, we do want to use we want these trails. So it's thinking about what else might sweeten the pot. And I don't know, that's a last minute kind of strategy, but it can be really helpful. So I think we should do some focus groups pretty darn quickly. And we've got a good database to pull from to do that.
Well, I'd like to be on the record for this meeting as asking for examples of materials that these are nice things that you've shown us here on the screen, but also that address the financials. The person who is the thinking person who wants to see the financial explanation. I'd like to see samples of those, and I'd not just visually like this. I'd like to physically, see them.
Yeah, we can put together.
So would the next step be to put together a schedule or
So we have, yeah, we have provided a proposal that outlines all the elements.
Okay.
We've been kind of, we just need to go ahead to say, okay, give us the plan.
Okay,
And then we go into the more detailed planning.
okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're actually meeting with your team on Friday to
Okay.
do that.
perfect.
Is there anything else
Yeah,
here?
if
that we
you
wanna-
look at I think it's the second to last slide, one of the most impactful materials in any bond conversation is the VIP or the voter information pamphlet, which goes out very close to the ballot. And that's where you're going to see that financial breakdown. That's kind of your last chance to say, here's what we're proposing. Here's what that bond looks like
We're gonna
for
go to the
you.
last-
And it's kind of a
I'll keep going.
there we go.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
So-
required by the state.
It's required by the
Good.
state, but how we present it is up to us. And so within some constraints, but in terms of images and how we print it and when we mail it, we kind of have a little bit of leeway
And
there.
I think Mark said something was really important too. The language, goes on the ballot is so important. How do we phrase that? How are we presenting this opportunity to the
We should
public?
probably start working on that sooner.
We really should, yeah.
Was this in November of 2023? Is that what that says?
Yes.
This one takes
It was last
real
year.
marketing. We got-
So this is the place where you provide every resident with that detail that I think you're talking about.
Exactly. So we get
And they're messages that we
South,
use
we've got-
throughout, hopefully. So you've seen them before on social, or you've seen lawn signs out that have directed you to the website that have given you more information. But it's kind of a very like all in one place for those voters who the only thing they pay attention to is the ballot. It's their last, way of getting that information.
We call this the Cotton Heights Town Center. Could you please add some SEO about Hillside Plaza redevelopment? Most people think of this as Hillside Plaza redevelopment, and when I Google that, this is not what's coming up, that website. And so I think that'd be really important to make sure that we have the Google search words that are taking our constituents to the site. Yeah,
Okay,
we can do
yeah,
that.
sure.
We can provide information on previous efforts. Do we have a green light to move forward with
Yes,
an outreach campaign? We can keep the council updated as we do that.
yes.
And one thing to remember is council members, as elected officials, you can be proponents of this project. The city staff cannot after that August 20th date. But, a supportive city council goes a long way.
We got that.
Well.
You got that.
Sean's got that.
We need the materials to do that.
Yeah, we
You know,
can it's produced.
District 3 is totally on board, and I think Councilmember Holton and I have, our districts are further away, and so, they're like, why would I fund this? We've got a lot of questions to answer.
Yeah. We'll get going on FAQ and on the message document too.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, you got it easy. You're easy.
Okay, so
Motion to adjourn our CDRA meeting.
do I need to read into the minutes?
Do we need to do that or not yet?
Just say that we'll approve the minutes at the next meeting.
Okay, so we will approve our minutes at the next meeting, and at this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion